Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Scott Bellis. I'm a counselor for the BC Yukon region of equity, and I am your current council president. Welcome to today's workshop. This workshop is about learning practical skills for helping us deal with difficult moments in the moment and hopefully help to make our creative workspaces safer. Before I introduce our facilitators for this workshop, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement as well as Equity's statement of affirmation. So today, I am speaking to you from the city of North Vancouver, which is located on the unceded, unrelinquished traditional lands of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. These people and other peoples of the Salish Sea have made their homes in this area for many thousands of years. The relationship to the land and waters of this region are ongoing to this day. Here's our statement of affirmation. Equity embraces an open and inclusive environment and encourages respectful behavior that affirms the dignity of all individuals. Equity further recognizes our shared responsibility for vigilance in creating and maintaining this environment. Equity recognizes a shared history with Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in Canada. In honor of those who have gone before us, Equity commits to working toward understanding and actionable practices of reconciliation. Thank you. So this is the 15th and final workshop in our series of sessions that have been funded as part of the Performing Arts Workers Resilience Program. And we would like to gratefully acknowledge the Government of Canada and the Department of Canadian Heritage for that funding of all our seminars and workshops that we have been delivering over these past several months. Now, after this workshop, we will be sending you all a link to complete a brief survey. We are really looking for your feedback on the workshops that we've been producing so that we have some guidance on where to take them next. So as we plan for future ones. Now, as usual, if you have a question, here's how we'll do that. If you have a question during the session, I encourage you to use the raise hand option, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, or to put your questions in the chat. We will monitor the chat for questions today. Okay, I think that's everything. I'm going to introduce our facilitators today. First of all, Stafford, Perry. Hello, Stafford. How are you doing?
Yeah, good to see you.
Stafford is an award-winning actor and community leader with extensive experience in public engagement and facilitation. As a community leader in men's engagement, Stafford has worked specifically with men and boys to prevent violence and foster social change for close to a decade now. He was instrumental in coordinating and developing the award-winning Wise Guys program, a groundbreaking violence prevention program for young men, and has facilitated over 100 professional and community workshops. That is Stafford. With Stafford is Jenna Rodgers. Jenna is a director and dramaturg. She is the founding artistic director of Chromatic Theater and the dramaturg for Playwrights Lab at Banff Center for Art and Creativity. She is the board co-chair of LMDA. I'll look to you to tell us what that means. What does that mean, Jenna, LMDA?
The Literary Managers and Dramaturgs of the Americas.
Oh, right. Yes, of course. Thank you. And the director of Theatre Alberta's Arts Trek. She's a passionate arts equity advocate, a graduate of the National Theatre School's Artistic Leadership Residency, the Banff Center's Cultural Leadership Program, and a member of the Art Equity National Facilitator Training Cohort. She is the most recent recipient of Canada Council's John Hirsch Prize and holds an MA in International Performance Research from the Universities of Amsterdam and Utrecht. That's a good. Great. Welcome to both of you. I hand over to you to lead us away. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. I think we've done these trainings before, and I think that's the first time we've had you actually introduce us, and I like it. It always sounds better when someone else introduces you. Why didn't we do that last time? Thank you for that introduction, and welcome everybody. I'm really excited. I'm really excited about today, and look forward to these all the time, but it's so nice to reconnect with this. And I don't know why, but specifically today feels like the right time. Before we do jump in, we'd like to do a land acknowledgement ourselves, kind of Jen and I, of where we're coming to you from. I think the land acknowledgement is very connected to the training that we are doing today. It really is about being in relationship, examining those relationships, how we're connected, and how that connects to our improving practices, getting into relationships that feel healthier, more equitable. And I think a land acknowledgement is really a key part of that. So Jen and I are coming to you through the Zoom world from the territory of the Niitsitapi. Oh, Jenna, you look like you had.
Well, I'm just going to pause to say directly to Randy's question. I think you can start the PowerPoint and pop it onto the land acknowledgement slide, as I think that might be beneficial for folks who like to follow along or read along, or who are interpreting Indigenous nations. There it is. Thank you. Stafford, take it away.
No, thanks, Jenna. Yeah, thank you. It's a presentation isn't official until there's a PowerPoint. So thank you. But I'd like to acknowledge that we're coming to you from the territory of the Niitsitapi or Blackfoot people and the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, including the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Îyârhe Nakoda First Nations, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3.
If you could just pause for the interpreters, we'll catch up. Thank you. Great.
Yes. Oh, you gave me that note as well. Yes. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Great. Yeah. Well, it's important that those are clear. So yeah, that's where we're coming to you from today. I'd like to express our gratitude, our connection to that as well. A lot of Jenna and I also talked about too around how we practice an acknowledgement. It's also an opportunity to if we wanted to bring attention to organizations within our area too. So right now we have a couple of links. Is that on this PowerPoint too? Maybe going to the next slide.
No, it is on that slide.
Oh, it is. There it is. Sorry,
just hard to see, which is maybe a note to say two things. You can adjust the size of the PowerPoint and the size of our faces by dragging the little bar in between the image and the video to make it as big or as little as you want. And then two, we do have this PowerPoint available in PDF to be sent out after the presentation. So I will be popping links into the chat as Stafford is reading them. And then, but also you'll have an opportunity to take a look at these later. So here are our two links, and Stafford, please continue.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I have to look. My eyes are so good.
I can say, part of our practice, I think, is to make an offering or highlight an organization. And in the spirit of sort of arts and arts engagement, we wanted to highlight a National Film Board video that's about 10 minutes long called Stories Are in Our Bones. And this is made by the filmmaker Janine Windoff, who's I think a Treaty 4 based filmmaker, which is in the Saskatchewan area, Regina. But she currently works at Bounce Center. And this is a 10-minute video that she is free to access that highlights teachings to her children. And then also Making Treaty 7, which is a Treaty 7 based organization that is currently led by Michelle Thrush, and based right here in Mulkinston. And they're just a great performing arts organization. So if you have time, money, inclination, and you want to check them out, the link is right there. And as we recognize the traditional land that we're situated within the conversation we're going to have today about consent and violence, it's crucial that we draw the parallel to the violence of colonization. So if we are to consider that consent is an agreement, it is imperative that we reflect and acknowledge that Treaty 7 and other treaty agreements across Turtle Island were not honored, and that the history of colonialism continues. To that end, we'd also love to know where folks are joining us from. So we invite you to put any land acknowledgement that feels right to you into the chat. And this is the first of many times we're going to ask you to engage with the chat feature today. On your own time, we'll keep talking. We'd love to sort of see where from coast to coast to coast people are joining us from today. And as Scott introduced us, so we don't have to say too much, but I will say my name is Jenna. I use she, her pronouns, and I work primarily as a director and dramaturg, and kind of understanding our position within theater may become important later in the conversation today. Stafford?
Yeah, my name is Stafford Perry. I work primarily as an actor within the performing arts community. And as said in the introduction, for the last 10 years, I've been working in violence prevention, primarily working with men and boys, doing a lot of bystander intervention trainings in a lot of different settings. So working with police officers, junior hockey teams, a lot of professional settings. So for me, this training is a real special opportunity because it allows me to take that training that I've been doing in other sectors and bring it into the performing arts, which is where I work, the work that I love, and uniting that. It's been really exciting for me. So this is a training I look forward to doing all the time. I use he, him pronouns. And also too, again, seeing where folks are from, if people are, again, putting into the chat where you're joining us from, really powerful part about this training and why we want it to be more of a meeting format than a presentation is that it's an opportunity to see other folks that are interested in this conversation. If we start to see that there is momentum, that we have people who are motivated to be engaged, to again, be active bystanders to try and create more positive communities, seeing that other folks are interested is a very powerful motivation for folks too. So yes, please feel free to join in the chat when you feel comfortable, and we will try and ask questions so that we can, again, see who's here, hear from you. It is really a collective conversation. Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. So today's workshop is about fostering a community of care and sharing in a collective responsibility to support each other in creating safe and equitable workspaces for all. I think this is sort of a repeat of what Stafford said, but because bystander intervention is about awareness of others' experiences and collective responsibility, we will continue to invite you to be part of the chat and other conversations and breakout rooms and practice points all throughout the session today. You are welcome to keep your cameras on or off. It is nice when we can sometimes see faces, but we also understand the expectation of having your camera on for the whole session may not be resonant with everyone. And it can be a strong motivation in bystander intervention to feel that you are supported if you step in, to know that other people care and feel the same way. So the interest in this workshop and the number of participants who are here today is really a testament to the fact that people in our community really do care about this work, and that you are not alone in trying to seek and create and cultivate communities of care in your work. Yeah.
The key thing too is that again, you are all experts in your own experience. So Jen and I, again, we've been fortunate to get to share these trainings, reflect with each other, build some skills, build some resources. We're going to share those with you today, but do realize that you are the experts in your own experience, and we don't pretend to be. We really want to offer. So feel free again to contribute. Take what applies to you. Again, if things aren't sitting right, we want it to be a collective conversation. So we can't even try to speak to everybody's experience, but we want to share. We want to make things as an offer, and we want you to, again, take ownership over these tools and apply them in ways that feel impactful for your specific situation, your specific communities.
Fantastic.
Yeah, great.
And it's great to see that we've already moved on to the agenda slide. I think we want to stay on that agenda slide. Thank you very much. That's perfect. Is it okay, Stafford, if we move on to this agenda?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. So I know lots of people like to know where the session is going. So this is the overview. We are in the introduction. We are going to be here for a moment longer. Then we will move into awareness, talking about why we're here, what the issues are. Then we'll talk about barriers, what might get in the way of intervention, before we dive into some tools and practical skills that you could apply. We'll give you an opportunity to practice those skills in breakout rooms before we move on to a conclusion, next steps, and offer some gratitude. Yeah.
That's it. So this is, again, it's not a Band-Aid solution. So this is very much a starting point, what we can cover in 2 hours, but it's not a quick fix. This is a process. So even for folks who may have been to previous trainings with Jenna, myself, or other bystander intervention trainings, it's always something that we constantly got to reevaluate. Even in the conversations Jenna and I had in preparation for this, it's exciting how nuanced these things become. Each time we re-examine a situation, an experience, we can build that awareness and keep adding to those tools, or even just continue to practice too. So, yeah, so even if folks are returning to this conversation, we're so grateful to have you here. Okay.
Great. So we can move on to the next slide, which is a little working agreement. In an ideal world, the working agreement is a tool that we like to build together in community. The primary reason for that is that the easiest way to keep people accountable to these group agreements is if they had a hand in creating them. That wasn't particularly practical for a 2-hour session. So we've made some assumptions and leaps and built a working agreement that we hope will serve everyone today.
Yeah, totally. So we're going to share some that we've offered, but also this practice. And again, like we said, in a, where we have more time and space, this is our first bystander intervention tool. So we know in rooms where we set up expectations that are pro-social, that are connected, that value relationships, where we set up those expectations preemptively before responding to something, you start to develop norms that are pro-social, and then also makes people more likely to step in to support the norms that you create. So a lot of these, again, this will be the first tool of bystander intervention. If you set up those positive expectations, create agreements that you can bring people back to, that makes intervening much easier. So you're already referring to something that you collectively have created together, as opposed to it falling on an individual to call someone out. So yeah, we'll share our agreements, and again, try and get you folks to agree to them as well. All right, so we can go to the next slide. Oh, there we go.
Great. Does that feel good? I don't know that we talked through all of the agreements.
Oh, we didn't. Oh, did it go? Oh, sorry. The last slide. Sorry, the last slide was the agreements. Oh, there
that was the agreement. Yeah, I was like, hold on a second. So thank you for backing us up, going with the flow. So briefly or swiftly, share the space. This is really about being mindful of your speaking time. Obviously, Stafford and I are going to speak the most, but make space for others to speak and avoid interrupting. This is particularly resonant when we hit our group work. The right to pass or participate means that, like, we'll invite you to participate in the chat. You don't have to. You always have the right to pass. Understand that individuals experience racism or all isms, sexism or homophobia, all in different ways, and recognize that each experience and viewpoint is valid, even if they differ. Validate experiences rather than trying to give advice. Consider that you do not need to agree with a perspective in order to understand it. Stafford, do you want to pick up with speak for yourself?
Yes. So again, speaking for yourself, this is again around understanding that our experiences are not representative of everyone else's. So we want to just offer our own experiences and not comment on others. We want to recognize that we are all in our own place of learning. So this is again about creating a space where we're not jumping to judgment, but being open to curiosity, trying to learn from each other so that we can again stay in relationship and find ways to move forward and work together. Being open to calling in harmful attitudes and your own self-reflection. So this is again about developing accountability. Which again is about building on staying in relationships. So being okay with folks highlighting where we need to grow and also offering that to other people and seeing that connection between accountability and support, and taking care of yourself. This is a training that is around offering care to the community. It's about collective care, collective responsibility. These are tools to practice those, but no one's an exception to this. This impacts all of us, and it starts with us again taking care of ourselves, checking in, being aware of our boundaries, and so encourage you to do that throughout this training as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks, Jenna.
Now that that's established, if there are any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. What is calling in? There you go. That's a good question. I think calling in is language that we often use that is in juxtaposition to this notion of like call in or call out. So when you are working in a community, we're asking people to like come in and be part of the community. And so if you can reframe, the notion, a lot of the tools that we're going to try to provide today are about giving tools to call people into community, to establish a baseline of community and say, hey, come on in and let's change that behavior. I think a lot of call out practices, if we're holding those two in opposition to each other, can often feel punitive, or like people can feel a sense of shame or embarrassment about like, oops, I did something wrong or I got caught. Whereas calling in is sort of acknowledging that we all make mistakes, and that if we're all committed to the principle of like a better, stronger community together, that we also need to hold each other accountable. But holding each other accountable doesn't have to feel like policing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. If there are more, we can go into that in more nuance as we start to develop some of these tools. But again, the primary difference I find between calling in and calling folks out, calling folks in is when we do in certain ways position ourselves with other people, that we do want to stay in relationship, that it's not about rejection and isolation or separation, but actually about staying in a relationship. BK Chan, who's a facilitator in Toronto area, does a whole workshop on the practices of calling in and some of those principles around that, about how even, situating yourself with someone as opposed to in opposition. So that's kind of a space. And again, there is a space for calling out as well too, but some of these tools are going to focus a little bit more on staying in relationship and building practices that allow us to move forward together.
Great. We're going to step forward into the next slide, which is just a title slide, awareness. And this is like, one of those moments we're going to be here for a second. So if you feel like sliding the panels visually and the balance, because there's nothing on that slide, you're welcome to. But this whole little section is about why we're doing this training, why Stafford and I offered this training. So this, we can stay there. We can stay on that awareness slide for a second there. That's okay. So this training is only one piece in creating a culture of respect and encouraging communities to care for one another. It does not replace supports in place for survivors of harm and other forms of violence prevention initiatives. This is simply a piece of the puzzle that we can all play a role in. Bystander training is a paradigm shift away from a binary perspective of person experiencing harm and person causing harm. and it opens up opportunities for sort of a collective community responsibility.
Yeah. Another key aspect too around this training too, and it connected what Jenna was saying around this being a collective responsibility, opening up opportunity for all of us to be engaged, is this key principle around moral injury. So when we see harm being caused and we do not step in and do something, we can experience what is called moral injury. And that impacts our sense of safety and also deeply impacting our identity and connection to our own values. So this is important because in workplace harassment, that impacts all of us. So developing tools to support other folks as active bystanders, but also tools to take care of ourselves so that we feel we can act in alignment with our values, that we don't see things happening, feel we can't respond, and that impacts how safe we feel in a space. So moral injury is kind of a key thing to point out because it shows that this work is not just to step in and, again, be a savior or a protector for other folks. This is about, again, creating safety for all of us, including ourselves within spaces.
Great. And we can slide into the next slide now, which is a quote that not all disrespect leads to violence, but all violence starts with disrespect. And as we think about that quote, and Stafford will talk a little bit about what that means, we'd also like to invite you to spread some awareness. And this is another opportunity to engage in the chat. So why are you here today? What are you hoping to learn or take away? What has made you show up? That's the question for the chat. I can type it into the chat, but feel free. And Stafford, you take it away.
Okay, yeah. I think, again, yeah, this is an exciting question. I hope folks do share too. But seeing why folks are here, it's great to, again, connect with where people are coming from, honor and value all that to show that we've all shown up for whatever reasons. This quote is important, and specifically for bystander intervention, because it's really connected to community change and where we can start to actually shift things and how many opportunities there are for that. So this is a really powerful quote within a lot of violence prevention work, but it basically allows us to connect to sort of foundational core values and causes of treatment towards other folks. That, again, behavior towards other people doesn't come from nowhere. So we want to look at some of those root causes so that we can shift community practices so that we're building on a more equitable foundation. As opposed to just jumping in and treating symptoms, how do we start to shift that whole collective responsibility? And we are going to use this quote as we start to jump into some of the tools, because it shows that we can start to make subtle shifts that create larger changes so that we don't have to do, again, large heroic acts. We can subtly start to just shift things, shift language, shift the way that we treat folks, shift the way that we are aware of other experiences. Yeah. I think we have some.
Yeah, we have a couple of nice answers coming into the chat about being more confident in de-escalating situations to create a safer workplace for everyone, to build creative community and think about ways that I might be causing harm. For a refresher from someone who's been here before, hi Sam, gaining new tools and perspectives, as well as to protect, but maybe learn ways of protecting without being direct. Gaining new skills, safe ways without to intervene without putting self in danger. Learn new ideas and concepts that can improve creative work environments and make safer spaces. Trying to channel experiences of feeling disrespected into being able to lead safer spaces. To recognize and articulate behavioral situations and gain tools to engage because they felt ineffective in past events that have escalated or unaware until there was hindsight. Facilitating care and safety. Some beautiful, wonderful, fantastic answers. Very, very resonant.
Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful, again, to see other folks' desires to show up and create positive change, because sometimes, again, implicitly, we know that folks want to be good, want to show up. But when we make what's implicit a little bit more explicit and give folks an opportunity to speak to their positive intentions and desires, it frees us up to vocalize that, to say the positive changes we want to see in our community. So that's why it's important to see that. And also realize that all motivations for being here are have got you to this point, this place of being curious, this place of wanting to start to explore this. So there's no there's no bad reason for being here. You being here is great. When what's motivated you, foster that. This also connects to, again, why we want a meeting, why we want to see, again, we see the numbers of folks showing up and how that can be positive. There was this study done where people were asked to judge the steepness of a hill. And when folks were on their own, they consistently would overestimate how steep the hill was. Whereas when folks were there at the bottom of the hill, out walking with other people, consistently would see the hill as less steep. So I think that does speak to us feeling like when we, where there's a hill or there's things to sort of face, if we are with other people, it can make things seem less steep.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stafford. And we can move on to the next slide, which is going to take us into an exercise on plausible refusal, which is like, another step on practice. Practice makes perfect. Just like rehearsal, we need to practice to improve. So we're going to start out really basic. You're in this session, you get a text from a friend asking you to go out tonight. I'm making a wild assumption, but you don't want to go out tonight. You want to stay in. So how do you reply to this friend? How do you tell them you don't want to go out tonight? Please feel free to pop your answers into the chat. Sometimes they take a moment to start.
I understand. This is not a setup to critique people's responses or social etiquette. This is a chance to just sort of reflect. Thanks for inviting me. Oh, there we go. They're coming now.
Yeah, tell them I'm feeling like having a night in. Thanks for inviting me. I've decided not to. Acknowledge the kindness. Let them know I'm not up for it. Thanks for the offer. I don't feel like going out. Say I'm not feeling well. Tell them I'm staying in and chilling. Lots of good answers. I'm curious about how these answers might change depending on who is asking. So I'm just laughing at the one that said outside with actual pants on. It's a good answer. So let's say that this text is yes from a friend, but from a friend who can give you a job that you really want. So that happens all the time in our industry. Does that change how you say no? Does that change? Do you maybe consider saying yes instead? What happens to you? That depends on how desperate I feel. There's a where and when answer. I don't know if the response from Sharon was from the first question or the second, but offering a new date. How about next week?
I definitely need a good excuse to refuse. Yeah.
Yeah, feel like you need a reason or an excuse to refuse. Doesn't always change what I say, but I second guess the decision. Yeah. Truthfully, yes, it absolutely does. Negotiating dates starts to happen. So like, what about this? What about that? I think like this is such a clear example about like, no matter how much we practice saying no or exercising what we want, it very, very quickly gets complicated. Yeah, even seeing someone saying I might force myself to go. No means no and yes means yes language is not usually how we communicate with each other, especially when it comes to industry matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is important too, because I think so quickly we start to see again, based on, again, some of the power dynamics that exist, formal and informal, how those impact boundaries. And the challenge it is sometimes to be clear with our boundaries to communicate them, and how socially sometimes it's not encouraged to be firm or strong within those boundaries. It's important for our own awareness. Again, this isn't about a judgment around this. Is around, again, how do we develop practices and spaces to support consent where people can honor their own boundaries. But this is also very important within bystander intervention work, because if we are looking for instances where we are seeing a moment where folks might need support, sometimes we might be looking for a clear no, a clear rejection. When we see how challenging that is actually to practice within even a simple request for a coffee or going out. So even especially in more intimidating situations, that a refusal may look like, again, an apology, a justification, actually trying to make someone else feel better. These ways that we try and, again, refuse. This was, again, it's about how we actually refuse in our interactions. So if we're looking for areas to support and what we're waiting for is a clear no, then we may be not aware of other opportunities where folks may be feeling like their boundaries are compromised, where it's hard to say no, where it's hard to refuse what other folks are offering or asking. Yes. So this is, I'll go for it.
Well, and I was just writing down that I'm like, the other thing that's really beautiful is that even in this brief exchange, we start to see tools and skill sets that you already have, that you are employing. Negotiation is a valid tool. Asking for more context, that's a valid tool to sort of say, I just need a little more information to understand what's going on here. Like, you know, I'm looking at Scott's question about like, is this a professional connection or a personal one? Let's that might affect how I decide, or even offering maybe next week, maybe whatever. Those are all ways that we establish boundaries and negotiate with given information, and make decisions. And that is also key to figuring out how best to respond in any given situation. Yeah.
A great comment too, again, around boundaries being hard. And also connected to how we're raised. I think that's very valid. And especially when it's not collectively supported. So when we feel that it's our own, we're there, boundaries are hard to practice in general, but if we don't create collective practices that support and encourage and explicitly make it an expectation for folks to feel okay to do that, then it's even harder. And if the way that we are raised or culturally thinking within theater practice, it's not something that is made explicit or supported, it makes it that much harder. So thinking about those working agreements, how are you setting working agreements in a space that honor boundaries, that honor consent, is really important, because we can see we're working against, the water that we're swimming in is sometimes a water that is about, again, prioritizing the comfort of others at times, especially when it comes to power dynamics.
Yes, and Nikki and Janet have given us the perfect segue into the next slide here, which is on social location. And we'll see a little wheel of power or privilege pop up here. And this is really a tool, just an image adapted from the ccrweb.ca that talks about power. And it doesn't talk about power dynamics in theater, but we know that power dynamics are there. We're even seeing people talk about it in the chat from a gender perspective or an age perspective, or even a position perspective, whether you're a director or an actor or a designer. There's even this notion of deferring to authority is all about how we relate to each other. So this tool represents something called social location. There are social lines that have been constructed in the fabric of society to categorize or group people. These are socially constructed lines, a concept or perception of something based on the collective views developed and maintained within our society. We can extend that into the theater realm, that there are categories and designations that have been socially developed that we ascribe to, and that helps us in our brains organize how power and relationships work. Your social location is the combination of the groups and categories that you belong to because of your identity. We all have a social location, and it may change throughout our lives. Some parts of our identity will not change, like our race or our skin tone, but we will age. We may become disabled. We may, our body size might change over the course of our life. And that will change the way we coexist in relation to other people. Yeah, Jane, and absolutely not every category, like Jane is noting that age is not included. And I'm like, yes, not every category could possibly be included because there are so many categories that we use to socially organize ourselves and that impacts us at different stages in our lives. And so the power dynamics in theater that we've started to dig into, how assigned roles, like whether someone's a director or an artistic director or an actor or a stage manager, that also interacts with our physical beings and connect to some of the feelings, I think, that are bubbling up in the text message exercise. So still hold on to some of those feelings that you have, because I think that continues to affect how we approach these tools and scenarios as we get further into the training. Anything you want to add here, Stafford?
That's so key. You covered it really well. And thank you for folks, again, adding the personal investment around things you see or don't see on this, and investing, again, in your own location. It's also why, again, we don't speak to this in a prescriptive way, where there is, here's what you need to do as an active bystander, because it can be like, well, easy for you to say, Stafford, based on your location. It's where we are within this, again, folks saying, again, as young professionals, again, age, at other ages as well, based on your social location, it does determine what options are available. So we want to open up areas where we can start to support. And it also does determine the level of accountability. Again, with folks who realize, oh, on this, there's a lot of power that I have within this space. How does that impact my level of accountability in creating space for others, in paying more attention to the experiences of others too? So that's why, again, this is really important to keep in mind as we go through the tools, as we go through scenarios, to not ignore this, really bring it to the focus so that we can look at things set in the realities that people are experiencing.
And with that, I think we can step to the next slide. So this is a more text-heavy slide. Again, you can readjust the balance if you would like to. We've created this little image that we're calling a pyramid of harm. And it's something we've created to just look at some of the conditions that are created in our industry that allow for harm to take place. We often don't think intervention is necessary until harm reaches like the upper levels of the pyramid. However, the lower levels of the pyramid create the conditions for those upper levels to exist. Again, not all disrespect leads to violence, but all violence starts with disrespect. So the pyramid, we think that demonstrates how power and hierarchy works together with discriminatory beliefs and values to lay the foundation for harmful behavior.
Yeah. This is, it's so key. Again, within these, we go from the circle to the triangles. We use all these diagrams to make really complex and dynamic human relationships a little bit more so we can comprehend and access these. So this pyramid is something that even as recently as this, preparing for this training, Jenna and I have gone back to re-examine, because it's quite nuanced. But this is really in connection to bystander intervention, is realizing that small shifts can impact larger changes, that things don't happen out of nowhere. And sometimes we go right to the top of a pyramid looking at these violent, harmful acts and ignore where that's growing from, where it starts, where it's validated from. Whereas if we look down at the base of the pyramid, it gives us opportunities to intervene in ways that feel less threatening and ways that, again, more consistently are available to us. So it's a pyramid of harm, but it's also, again, it's about a pyramid of kind of anti-violence, where we can interrupt, where we can not validate, and where we can shift things from progressing up that pyramid.
And to that end, it's perhaps a way that we can think about how we can always be doing bystander intervention, or how we can understand actions we're already taking as bystander intervention. So by fostering attitudes and beliefs that we want to see in our industry and sort of cutting off some of those things that we've listed there at the head, we are laying the foundation for more positive working environments and making it much more difficult to escalate along that pyramid. So intervention being about finding the points where we can create positive change, and knowing that some of these things, yes, are easier to do by certain positions in our industry, but that we all can play a part in something about, like, I don't know, diffusing stereotypes or questioning stereotypes. Like, that's something we could all do all the time. And the more those attitudes and beliefs are disrupted, the harder it is to ascribe to them and move on up the pyramid. Could star power be explained? Yeah, probably. We went through this and we're trying to go, like, can we explain each and every one of these? And I think star power is kind of in line with, like, this director as all powerful, so that sometimes in our industry, like, there's the perception that, like, the star or the lead of the show also has more power than the rest of the cast. And that can come down to, yes, there's that belief exists. And what that starts to normalize is opportunities for, I was going to kind of jump to, like, pay scale, opportunities for pay inequity inside of the room, but it could also legitimize, like, maybe abusive behavior because they're the star. They can get away with certain things that other people might not be able to get away with. And so, yeah, what happens when it becomes really normal or common for us to say that one actor in the room is better or more of a star than others?
Yeah, it clearly ingrains the idea that certain folks have more value than others, so that within that space, this person is more valuable, so those needs will be catered to, even if it's at the sacrifice of other folks. So it's realizing that anyone in a rehearsal space, in a professional working setting, has access to all basic human rights and actually has the same value within a space. So star power is about hierarchy and about creating value for certain folks that can mean that other people get treated with less value. And so I think it's that it speaks to that. This pyramid too, please, like, again, we will send this out, look through it. And again, it doesn't have to resonate, again, your truth or your, this is Jenna and I trying to make sense of some of the dynamics within our community. I've done pyramids, again, with lots of different communities. I went in working with junior high boys, and we had a very different pyramid of harm that was looking specifically at coming in and I was asked to come in and work with young boys around circumstances of homophobic bullying. And coming in to work with that, again, tip of the pyramid where there's an instance of violence. And this pyramid was around setting up, how do we have a conversation collectively with these young men over a long period of time where we start to break down how are they using, what slang words are they doing? What are they using to put each other down? How are they, again, those core values at the base of this pyramid before jumping to that specific incidents. So jokes they were making, and then how they would make fun of each other, who had status. So that pyramid started saying, well, if we start to interrupt it so that we're just not making those jokes within this class space, we're not validating, we're not allowing that to progress to a point where people think that's something I'm going to act out and people will be okay with. But look at this pyramid, make it real to you and adjust and question these things too, because they're not truths. This is about how dynamics and the key thing is too, is this is socially created. So this is something where we can absolutely shift. I've been in rehearsal halls where those working agreements from day one are actively shifting what's in the bottom of this pyramid. And so that's something to keep in mind. Great.
We will circle back to this pyramid in a bit. So if other questions bubble up, feel free to put them in the chat. But we will step forward into barriers to intervention. So now we are going to start talking about things using this pyramid as a gateway to discuss things that may prevent us from intervening. And so to start off, this is another opportunity to put some ideas into the chat. What I'm curious about is, in your experience, why don't people choose to step in? What prevents people from intervening? I will type that up into the chat while Stafford talks.
I think it's really, this conversation about barriers is really key to any form of intervention, because that's where we have to shine light. We have to shine light on those barriers so that we develop strategies that deal with them, that face them, or remove those barriers. So that's why this is an important explicit conversation. Again, I've done lots of consent conversations with young men, and sometimes we talk openly about, okay, here's the practice of consent, and we would ignore some of the social barriers that they were facing. For example, rejection. They would be made fun of with their friends, or rejection was something that was connected to emotions that they didn't feel they had support or spaces to process it. So in order to practice consent, we needed to talk about rejection. We needed to develop tools to face that, for folks to deal with it, to make it something that they could. If there's no option around experiencing rejection, then consent is hard to practice. So we need to make these barriers explicit so that we have strategies that address them. Here we go.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of responses that hone in on fear or social alienation, accidentally making things worse, or of not having the correct information, being seen as difficult, implosion of your career. Again, a lot of things that focus on the power and status and hierarchy, things that are in play in the room. The extra labor, that's such a good point too, that like, even if you're good at it, like, why is it becomes extra labor to take care of these things?
Yeah. That's a huge one of that extra labor. Again, going back to that social location reflection, again, folks reflecting on where they are within that social location, thinking about, again, is it folks who are just experiencing forms of oppression responsible for also facing that? Where if we have areas where we have privilege, how are we connecting to that conversation? How are we connecting to that power dynamic? And are we doing our work?
We can step into the next slide here, where we've got another quote just from, this one's from Augusto Boal, who says, "We cannot get there from there. We have to get there from here." So we can idealize the world we want to be in as much as we want, but we have to build that world from exactly where we are today, which is to say that all of your reasons are valid. All of the fear and labor and work and hierarchies that you're thinking about absolutely exist. And that's what we are working with and working through. Let's step forward one more slide. These are, we can go forward one more slide. We have a little slide that says barriers to intervention. This is perfect. Why you might choose not to intervene. So we tried to guess what might come up in the chat. Came up with like fear, anxiety, embarrassment, feeling unsafe, that worrying that what's happening is normal, or that it's none of our business, or worrying that like maybe I'm the only one who thinks that this is uncomfortable. There's the fear of losing status or power or privilege. Will I be perceived negatively if I intervene? There is trying to uphold social norms. So trying to check in with how everyone else is reacting to the situation before making a decision. There's also the assumption that someone else might help, that maybe you're not the best person to step in. And then social cohesion is about, I guess the proximity to the event, the bystander effect. The bystander effect talks about the more people that are nearby, the less likely sometimes we are in the situation to do something, because it always feels like there's someone else available to do it, versus like if you're in a one-on-one situation or a two-on-one situation, there aren't as many options, and people often feel more compelled in these smaller situations to speak up. And that social cohesion is about being more likely to intervene with people who we perceive as being like us, Because and a tool to sort of work around that is to build empathy and friendship and cohesion with people who are different from us, so that we feel more inclined and able and capable to help folks outside of our personal identities. And then I think that sometimes speaks to maybe what Carmela was bringing up, that often extra labor falls on marginalized communities because it's easiest for us to then see or relate to violences that are happening. But, you know, the more friends that you have that are outside your own lived experience, the easier it will also be for you to understand when they're experiencing harm. Stafford, would you like to add to any of that?
No, I think that was one for the social cohesion and that empathy. That's so powerful. And again, something we can constantly be practicing. Nikki also put a great thing into the chat too around the bystander effect. And that's really important too, because once you understand it, it's much easier to overcome. So the bystander effect, as Jenna said, when you're the only person around an event that happens, people are close to 80% likely to step in and do something. When there are 3 other people, so it only takes a few other people to be around, it drops to 31%. So it's quite a drastic influence. So it's really important to understand why. Some of it's the diffusion of responsibility. Some of it is around social inertia. So when we see something happen, we look for the social cues of other people. So we look around to see what's happening. And often if something drastic is happening, people go into, there's a sort of fight, flight response, but also a freeze response as people process. And when we look around to see what other folks are doing, what we see is folks doing nothing when really they're maybe in a state of freeze, maybe trying to take cues themselves from other folks. And it creates this inertia because what we look around and we see people is doing nothing. When we understand that that's what people are doing, that they're just processing response to something that's happened, then we know that once one person steps in, folks are much more likely to start to offer their own support. So we can shift that inertia in the same way. So it's that awareness is huge. Just realizing when people aren't doing anything collectively, they may be in a state of freeze and then looking to each other for cues. So if you can start that, a small shift in that could open up floodgates for a lot of other people to also offer support. So that's powerful. So that's why a small thing could open up that inertia, shift that inertia. Yeah. Another one too, Good Samaritan principle too, which is another thing. These are a lot of principles, but the awareness of this does open up and it does sort of motivate folks. But the Good Samaritan principle is basically what they realized the biggest restriction to people stopping and helping someone. And they tried to prime people in a lot of different ways. If they had read something motivational, were they more likely to step in and help someone and do a good deed? The key factor in people offering support to other people was time. If people were in a hurry, that was the biggest deterrent to them offering support. So that's really important in, again, processes that sometimes feel like we are scarce for time. If time is something that is pressuring folks, that can be the largest deterrent to offering care. So we have to realize we have to make space, we have to make time for care and prioritize that. So it's important. If people are in a hurry, that can be the biggest deterrent for help.
And it's a great learning point for anyone who often wears the producer's hat. That time is the biggest gift we can often give one another for healthy spaces and workplaces. I think we can step forward into the next slide, which is a return to the pyramid of harm, just briefly. So what can we do to overcome these barriers? Know that small shifts do accumulate towards social change. Often this can look like it's truly a starting point about not validating behavior that reinforces the foundational levels. And that there is value in being proactive versus reactive. So it is often, again, easiest to create the conditions for positive workplace than it is to respond to challenges in the workplace when they arise. We list the working agreement as an example in being proactive and sort of like taking the time at the beginning of your process or your session to set agreements, it's not really rules, for how you want the space to feel, and that everyone participates in the making of that. And part of that can be saying, what about our culture about live performance culture do we want to keep? And what about that are we okay to do away with? Because let's face it, there are some things that serve us in our culture and some things that don't. This notion, I'm just even thinking about this notion of a strict hierarchy. I'm like, well, hierarchy also does exist. You think about the moment, we were talking about this in rehearsal this last week, about the moment in devise process where you transition from like everyone contributing and it feels really good to like the moment where you need a director or you need a stage manager or you need someone to say, hey, we have a presentation in 3 days. And so, yeah, a hierarchy sometimes serves us, but when does it not need to be so strict? How? Those kinds of questions that you can ask the room you're working in.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think this is a great launch pad to step into our next slide, which is, yeah, again, seeing why folks wanted to be here. Again, this is some of the things that people want to see. What are some tangible tools to allow us? That awareness piece is really important. Go for it, Jenna. Go for it.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Great. So the awareness piece is, as you can see, we've already started to develop a lot of tools, a lot of practices that are already setting us up more, that are supporting us. But now we're going to jump into some real practices. And again, these are not prescriptive, but they're offerings. So keep everything in mind that we've talked about so far and test, and we'll see how these sort of work.
And we're going to start with a sample scenario. If you've been with us before, we did this with a car crash, but we're going to take it into the theater and say that hypothetically, it's tech rehearsal. You are watching from the wings as others in the cast run through a complicated transition in which a large, heavy piece of furniture needs to be moved, maybe a wall. It bumps into someone. You hear a yell. The stage manager calls stop. It is immediately evident that an actor is hurt. What do? Please feel free to put your responses into the chat. I will put the scenario into the chat. Yeah, yell stop.
If the actor needs help, go over and see if they're okay. Check to see if the person needs help.
Go to find ice, get the first aid person. Connect with the first aid person, ask if 911 needs to be called.
Great. These are all great responses.
Lights up. Yeah, that's a good piece too. Checking in with that person who was injured. So this is, and these responses can continue to flow in, but this is an opportunity to look at our human instincts when we are intervening in a physical collision versus a non-physical collision. I love this. Begin to approach. Think of who has first aid if they're there. Step back, be aware, give the person space. With a physical collision, humans tend to offer support and attention where the support is needed. So the person who's been injured. With a verbal collision or harassment scenario, our instincts often tend to give focus and attention to the person causing harm. So the person who's yelling. In this particular instance, no one was like, go yell at the actor who was pushing the wall. Everyone's like, let's focus on the person who's hurt. And just holding a physical collision next to a verbal collision is a good reminder for us that when it comes to intervention, particularly in like verbal or emotional scenarios, there are often multiple parties that you could go to to intervene, that would be considered intervention. If we, yes.
Yeah.
The end of my sentence.
No, that's perfect. This is so perfect. This is something, again, before we jumped into the Zoom trainings within the bystander trainings, we would set up an actual physical collision. and get people to respond, see what they would do. And again, all of your responses were exactly in line with what people would do when a physical collision was happening. We would then set up an altercation where it was right after an event had happened, where it was a more of a social collision, where again, folks were making folks feel whether they were discriminated, putting someone else down, not a physical collision, but a social collision. Within the first physical collision, people would respond quickly. It was clear where the support was going, and the harm was always validated. So those are key principles that when we put into the social collision, that often there was a real question around validating the harm. Was it serious enough? Did this require a response? So it wasn't always validated. Then where the focus would go was always a little bit unclear. So sometimes, again, towards the person causing harm or where support was needed. That would be a little bit of a question. So we could see, again, if we set them next to each other, we say, okay, where's the support? Is it easier to offer support and ask someone if they're okay? Put that focus, put that attention there, maybe actually stand beside them, as opposed to putting the focus where the harm's coming from. So first off is validating that social harm is real harm. And we know that, again, within workplace studies around mental health, around people's general health, that sometimes social collisions can cause longer lasting impacts on people's health, that we know that this is very real harm. So how do we validate it? How do we focus where support can be? And that can open up more options for support. And how do we develop some clear practices? Because like you said, first aid, who knows that support? And that's what these tools that we're going to offer you are, some of those tangible tools like first aid might be. So yeah, so those are the things to kind of keep in mind with that no longer car crash principle, the wall moving principle is to do that, validate harm, offer support, as opposed to, again, stepping in front of the wall. And also, how do we create some practices that be like, oh, here's a standby, here's one that I know, here's something I know, here's a step, that first step that we can do.
So we're going to talk about 5 Ds that can be employed when you are a bystander and you want to intervene. If we step into the next slide, it is direct. And I think this is where the PowerPoint added animation that I didn't intend. So feel free to maybe hit the space bar again and you'll get the bullet points coming through there. But direct intervention is about confronting the harmful behavior directly. So the target of the behavior is empowered to leave the situation, or the perpetrator can make the choice to stop. So again, this can look like going directly to the person who is causing harm, or it can go in between the person who's causing harm and the person being harmed and say, hey, are you okay? I don't know if this is very cool, and concentrate on the person who is receiving harm. You can use your power and privilege to make it about you. For example, something like, I'm trying to work here and what I see you doing is making me uncomfortable or is distracting. You can say things like, I don't feel comfortable with those kinds of jokes in this setting. Or you can say, I don't get it. Can you explain why what you said is funny? Just some examples of direct language. You can also use the desk model, which we're going to put a pin in because we have a whole nother slide about the desk model that we'll come back to, but it is like a communication tool for like how to construct direct sentences in ways that don't escalate. Is that an accurate summary, Stafford?
I think so, yeah. Again, some of the key concerns that we saw at the beginning, that people are afraid to escalate. Also, people not wanting to create conflict or escalate conflict. So that's why, again, the car crash principle is an important way to set it up, because there are lots of different ways to be direct in offering support, direct in, again, making it about speaking to your own needs. And that's why when we talk about the desk model, that will be when we do want to address someone specifically about their behavior. How do we do that in a way that doesn't encourage escalation? And that's an assertive model, assertive communication tool that we'll talk about. But there are lots of different ways to be direct. And also, go for it. You
Well, I was going to say, and that means we're going to talk about the next D.
Exactly.
Yes?
Yeah. Sometimes that's where we think bystander intervention starts and stops, right? We think we're not being direct and we're not intervening. So now we want to open up some other options. The second D is distract. This one is really key because it's about creating space. Something happens immediately. We don't want to do nothing. We want to do something. So how do we create space? So again, we see a harm happening. We want to focus the support on the person experiencing that harm. So a key piece in doing that could be creating space for them. So creating a distraction or redirect the focus of either party to ensure that they can get out of the situation, sort of like a harm reduction. Let's stop that before it escalates any further. If it is appropriate, you can use humor or an excuse to divert the attention of the person causing harm. This can create an opportunity for the person who's experiencing the behavior to get out of the situation, to leave. Key thing is you can, again, ask questions. Take focus yourself if you feel comfortable doing that. Key thing about distract is it does allow you to be creative. Use who you individually are. Again, your social location really impacts how you may distract. You can use your job within a space. If you are in a rehearsal hall, you could, if an actor say, hey, can we work on that scene? Can I ask a question about that? Can we want to run lines? Use what you're also doing actively there, why you're there within that space as a tool to create distraction. Key thing about distraction too is that it creates that space in that moment, but we will talk about some of the limitations of some of these Ds as far as as we progress our accountability, sometimes a distraction is creating space but doesn't actually address what happened and can support social norms that don't address what the event is, but in that moment can create space.
Yeah, great. And there are those bullet points appearing right there that Stafford just talked through.
No, there we go. Yeah. Anything to add, Jenna, to that one?
No, I think that you got that fantastically. To say, like, as we proceed, we're going to give you 5 Ds. Not every D is appropriate for every situation, but there are all ways to think about it. If we step forward to the next slide, the third letter D is delegate. And you're welcome to bring those bullet points up whenever feels right for you. Delegate is about asking others to get involved, to help take charge of the situation. Thank you very much. And they're both formal and informal ways to delegate. So informal delegation could look like utilizing social connections. Who do you know that a certain person might listen to? Who's the person the message might be most impactful coming from? And formal delegation might be talking to someone whose position exists to support and help in these scenarios, like your deputy, or like referring to the not in our space policy. We got that acronym wrong. I got that acronym wrong. I made that. It might also be, the referring back to that. Often on the first day, someone will give a speech and say, I'm the company manager, you can come talk to me, or this is the email for our board of directors, you should email them. So those would be sort of formal ways of delegation.
Yeah, we see. Thank you, Nikki. I think, yes, I can see why slowing down this section, because this is really the heart of this. But you know what? We are going to go through the Ds, but we're not going to move on from them. The rest of our sort of practice and application is going to be applying these. So yes, we'll make sure that we do not rush over them, but do know that we will go back to the direct, the distract, these other Ds that we continue. And then we are going to go into some practice where you will get to work through scenarios with each other and really look at each one of these tactics. So thank you.
Yeah. What we can also say is that you don't have to wait for something to happen to engage delegation. Checking in with folks and creating connections, or offering support before issues arise, are a way to make positive connections and to make folks know that you're available when support might be needed. So that's also about creating a community of care. Also sets the tone, I guess, for if the need for delegation should arise. And then also a nice reminder that we got from one of our previous sessions that that support exists in a bunch of different ways. Someone brought up the importance of remembering that you have a you might have a fight director or an intimacy director, choreographer, a vocal coach. That support or the need to delegate these people's roles goes beyond the psychosocial. So they could be really specific supports for ensuring that bullying or harassment doesn't happen in instances of connection in your rehearsal process. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
The next D, the fourth one, is delay. Oh, yeah.
yes.
Thank you, Sarah, for the reminder that deputy is now a liaison. I appreciate that reminder. It is good language. Delay is about knowing and validating that not all action needs to be immediate. And we did hear that in some of our chat comments earlier, like not really realizing there was a problem until later. Of course, it does. Of course, there is often a time span on like the need to intervene, but it isn't always immediate. So if you need to gather more information from an outside source or from someone else, or if you feel like you missed an opportunity to intervene, don't panic. A delayed response looks like following up and asking if someone is okay after the fact, to show others that you care and that you're there to support them. And you can also follow up with the person who has done the harm, that when the situation is not in the like peak of happening, to be able to pull someone aside and say, I wasn't really cool with how that scenario played out yesterday. How are you feeling now? Why did it happen like that? You know, those kinds of questions and conversations can be equally effective at preventing them from happening again.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, Jane, that's a great clarification, and thank you. It does speak to a larger point as well around the responsibility of a liaison, what their formal requirements are, and making sure that we realize the scope of support we are asked to provide, and also the limits to the scope of support we can provide each other. There are times when, again, referring folks to other supports is needed. This is about a collective responsibility, where we share that, where we're not stepping over our own what we're capable of as far as the support we can have. That's why collectively, again, we can not have to step in and try and do it all for folks. And also knowing that, yeah, the role of the liaison is not offer, very specifically, as you said there, simply to make that the company members have access to information. And that can be referring. And so that's key too. Again, knowing when we are supporting each other, what you feel capable of in each moment matters. So thank you for that, Jane. Great. And on to the final D.
The final D is about document. And you can bring up those bullet points again. That would be lovely. And this is noting that there are existing avenues for formal documentation. We should be theoretically at the beginning of each contract provided with the escalation process within individual companies. Stage management theoretically is writing down and recording what's happening in rehearsal and performance for record. You can also presence yourself proximate to the situation. We're seeing this more and more in these era of cell phones, that people sometimes even like turn on the phone and record what's going on. That might seem a little bit silly in a rehearsal scenario, but you can still be an active witness to what's going on if something is happening in a rehearsal space. And then I also often speak to the personal practice, the practice of noticing things, of trying to understand patterns, of reflecting on power dynamics in the room, of journaling. When we talk about social cohesion and the fact that we're most likely to notice harm being done to people who are most like us, part of a practice of noticing is saying, what is the experience of someone who has a different body than mine? Can I notice that this group might be feeling more sensitive in this moment? Can I reflect privately, personally on why that might be? And then how might that affect my behavior in the room in future instances? Is there anything that you might want to add to document, Stafford?
I think it's wonderful because it connects to like the delay and document in combination, because it is those moments after, when again moments and opportunities are going to keep coming up, and there's going to be times where we, again, maybe for all those reasons, don't do what we hope we would. So how are we reflecting on those moments, and then still being responsible after the fact if there are things we can do, and documenting that so that we start to build on this awareness. So yeah, again, that's why we started and spent all of that time with the awareness piece, because it is so impactful on whether we do step in, is building that awareness. So I think it's that constant practice. It also means too, we don't have to wait for opportunities to intervene. We can constantly be building this practice.
That's great. And now, as promised, we're going to talk a little bit about the desk model, so we can step into the next slide. So this is about an assertive communication model that's useful for being direct without escalation.
Yeah.
You can bring up the bullet points again. I think that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Stafford, do you want to talk us through this?
Sure. Yeah. So again, this is about, again, if we want to talk to people specifically about behavior. It's important that it's about behavior, because that's where there's a possibility for change. Behavior can shift, behavior can change. So we want to make sure that we're not talking about who people are or going after, again, their identity, but we want to talk about behavior that needs to shift. So that's why the first thing, if we see something, the first thing is we want to describe. And what we want to describe is that behavior. So what we see, and the more specific we are about that behavior, the more there is a chance for folks to, again, build awareness, but for it to change. So you can say, I see that you're speaking very loudly and you're using language that is offensive to me, or whatever that situation, being very specific about what that behavior is and describing it. Expressing it is around impact. Key thing around describing the impact is that using I statements makes it about our experience, which again, it makes it so a person will be less defensive. So when this behavior, so I see that you're speaking very loudly, you're using language that is offensive to me, that makes me feel unsafe, makes me feel disrespected. It means that when you say you speak in I statements, it means it's harder for a person to disagree, say, no, you don't, or no, so you're not attacking. Key thing around I statements is you're not saying I feel like, because if we're going to say I feel like, often we're going to say something that's not a feeling. So you're speaking loudly, I feel like you are a jerk. That's not really a feeling, right? It kind of shifts. So talking about your own experience. The desired change, being specific. Could you please lower the volume of your voice and please stop using that language? So very specific about that change that we want to happen. Clarify could be speaking to the benefits. So this is, again, especially when it's an informal conversation, maybe talking about specifically to a colleague and it's not a formal situation. It could be clarifying the benefits of that shift in behavior. Then I can continue to work with you, feel comfortable. We can remain colleagues. I feel like we can continue with the work, clarifying those benefits. A clarification in a more formal setting could be about some of the consequences if a person doesn't shift that behavior. So that clarification is important. So first, describe the behavior. So it's not about who a person is, but what they're doing. Express the impact with I statements so that there's not a defensiveness, but it highlights the impact. Be specific with the change, and that's something that they can shift. And then clarify what those benefits may be or the consequences. So it's a bit prescriptive, but even just thinking about a couple of those key aspects around the desk model can be great in a assertive way. So just I'm going to talk about behavior. I want to be specific about behavior. I'm not going to make statements about who people are. I'm going to try and use I statements when I'm talking about impact, and not describe what other people might be experiencing. And highlighting benefits about the relationship moving forward, or consequences being clear. If there are any questions about that, I'm happy to kind of talk a little bit more about it. Something that does take a little bit of practice, but can be useful, especially when we do have, again, instances where based on our social location, based on our power and privilege within a room, we do want to be direct, and we do want to speak to behavior that we no longer want within a space.
Maybe a nice thing we can do is take our pals through a sample scenario. So if we go to the next slide, yeah, it's just an image holding space, sample scenario. That's fantastic. Exactly. I have a Google Doc that's got a bunch of scenarios in it, and you all are going to be working on that scenario shortly. Oh, there we go. But to start, Stafford and I will attempt to do one for you. And I'm just scrolling in my background document to pull it up. I should have put the whole scenario, Stafford, into the notes document.
Roll with it. Always just roll with it.
So many windows. Okay, so the scenario is an artistic director who's your friend programs a season in which every writer, every director is a cisgender man. This is brought to your attention while you're in a group conversation in which a cisgender woman director, another friend, brings up her. I put that in the chat. That's the scenario. And so if Stafford and I were going to try to employ the 5 Ds and maybe the desk model, what would that look like? So Stafford, how might you be direct about this?
Yeah. So I think an opportunity to be direct if, so this is brought to your attention in a group conversation. So it could be, again, directing support towards the person who is bringing up the concern, asking them questions about that if they feel like sharing. In that moment, giving space, listening, responding, and kind of, again, taking note so that you're really giving space for those feelings. If you have a relationship with the artistic director, I think there would also be an opportunity to follow up in a direct conversation if you feel you have access to that person. That could use a little bit of the desk model, but it could also just be a simple question. I think questions are a useful way to be direct, just to ask people to speak to something. So you could, I think that would be a useful way of being direct, is saying, I noticed this. What's up with that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the desk model, if you were talking to that artistic director, might look like, I see that you've programmed this particular season. I feel that that might not be giving everyone in our community a chance. I need or would like to know why you made these decisions. Because I'm not confident that they benefit our community as a whole. So I'm just trying to wing it there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, that's not a perfect sentence or a perfect question, and it might not work for everyone, but it's an opportunity to practice what building that sentence might look like, what prep I might do if I were choosing to talk to someone in this way. So that's all in the pile of direct.
Yeah, I think that's a cool example of, Jenna. I see you work through that too. Again, when we try and use the desk model, it's key that often that's coming up in conversations. So you will be having someone respond. So I think that it's not a perfect science, but you're going back to some of the, let's talk about the behavior. Let's talk about the I feelings. So I think that's great because it's not going to be perfect. They're going to be like, wait, I'm only on the E. I need you to wait for me to finish the S and the C.
Totally. And so employing some of our other Ds with this scenario, Stafford, how might you distract or delegate or delay?
Yeah, this is really exciting because we talked a little bit about this for distraction. And this is why distraction is a key one, because I think it's about harm prevention. So if you need to create space for someone to leave a harmful situation, within this one, this is sort of a premeditated thought. So to cause a distraction when someone's sharing how they feel about this doesn't feel at all appropriate. Where distraction might come up is, again, if you are trying to have a direct conversation with the artistic director, using humor maybe to start that conversation. You don't feel like you could be like direct, like I'm going to sit down and use the desk. I might use some sort of like technique to bridge that conversation to start. So that's where that might be used. Delegation would be a kind of a key one too. Again, if you are someone who maybe the artistic director is your friend, but you are hoping to maybe get work, maybe you are a cisgendered, or no, it's just the right artistic directors, but maybe you're trying to get work in this situation. You could say, well, who else is connected in this decision making, this company that you could ask questions to? Maybe you could be direct with one of them in a way that works, or someone who could be. So maybe finding someone who could have that conversation and say, here's a concern. This is important to me. Is that something that you could start that conversation with? So delegation seems like one that would work.
And then document might, it is that practice of noticing. In some ways that person bringing it to your attention is a form of documenting. But documenting might also look like research or preparation that you do before any conversation you're going to have. Maybe you look back at that theater's history and realize the previous season happened to be all cisgender women, writers and directors. And then that might shape the way your conversation goes in a different pathway. It could simply just be the practice of noticing, this is what happens. I wonder if there is or will be a pattern in the future. I think everyone is back now. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for indulging us. It was really wonderful to see those responses come into that sheet. You're all, I hope it looked like you were all having fantastic discussions and conversations. We have a few more points to touch on before we wrap up today, but we would welcome you, invite you to put any reflections that you have or questions that bubbled up from that experience into the chat, and we'll attempt to address them a little bit at the end of the session. Does that sound right, Stafford?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I hope that was useful. Again, within the online trainings, it is nice to, again, connect with folks beyond just Jenna and I sharing and talking, but to connect with fellow, community members too. Hear the perspectives of other experiences and kind of connect. So I hope that was useful to get to connect and talk with each other. Now, we'll go for it.
Yeah, no, that's it. We're going to move into the next slide there, Alona, and it is the spheres of influence, which is to say that the key to contributing to accountable environments is learning how to intervene in a way that fits your comfort level and the situation that you're in. And personal safety always has to come first. The spheres of influence are just a visual to represent that we have to start by making the changes within ourselves and our own practices. And then that moves out to the next circle, which is sort of interpersonal. Usually we say close friends and family. Perhaps that could mean a rehearsal hall, perhaps not. A social institution is maybe like a little bit bigger. That could be like, a theater that you feel very comfortable working at, or a venue, or with a group of people. And then community is sort of that like whole larger sectoral change.
Yeah.
So if we're creating a community of caring, we always start from the inside and work our way out. Stafford?
Powerful thing about this thing is that these are interconnected. So these spheres of influence, they impact each other. Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote Emergent Strategies and a couple other books, talks about the principle of fractals, and that's how patterns repeat themselves. So things that we work on smaller levels, whether it's an individual reflection, that those do have impact and reflect at those other levels of influence. So this individual reflection today, what we were doing today, those conversations that you had with the other people in your groups, those can ripple out to create that larger community change. So yeah, we don't have to jump right to those that larger changing structures, although we do want to and work on those things at the same time. We can sometimes go back to that internal individual reflection. And you move in and out. If you need to go back to that personal to fuel up so that you can continue to have these conversations on a larger community level, it really work where you feel you can build that strength to bring it to those other spheres that you are impacting, whether you like it or not. We impact all levels of these spheres. Plus we love shapes, right?
We love shapes.
Love shapes.
We could step forward one more slide here. And this is a very similar slide. This is about, yeah, that's exactly it. It's about accountability. So the key to contributing to accountable environments is learning how to intervene in a way that fits your comfort level. We talked about this a little bit more with the pyramid of harm, but it's about not making certain jokes, about challenging biases and beliefs, about education and awareness, like being at this session here, and about building community and knowing that other people being at this session and the number of people who have taken this session over the years contributes to the community that wants to see change as a whole.
Yeah. A key thing with accountability too is that it goes hand in hand with support. So if we're looking at each individual level, we say, okay, how am I holding myself accountable on the individual level? Also, what supports do I have in order to keep myself accountable? So realizing that seeking those supports, staying connected to others, same with interpersonal, is how am I staying accountable at interpersonal levels? Like how am I in my relationships, making sure that I'm not letting jokes go by that I don't bring attention to, but also who do I feel can support me in this practice? Where is that support coming from? So support and accountability really have an important relationship together. So keep that in mind. So at each level, how am I holding myself accountable? How am I creating accountability at each sphere? And what supports am I seeking? And how am I making sure that I have the support to stay inspired, to stay connected, to stay motivated?
So for a closing round of participation, we would love to ask you all to use the accountability model to reflect on something that you'll try to do within your own spheres of influence as an action plan. So this is a simple statement. Is there one sentence that you can offer into the chat that you are going to try to incorporate into your practice going forward? And the reason that we ask for this is because we also know that when you write something down, you're more likely to do it. So what is one thing that you think you can take forward from this training?
Yeah. And again, keeping in mind too, that small shifts, small changes, small areas of growth lead to larger changes in communities too. So, but you can also be big, be bold as well.
Really lovely to see some responses coming in about being aware that everyone's body is different, checking in with the person who you feel has been slighted before leaping to action, the clarity of the desk model, 5 Ds into awareness. Thank you. It helps us also to know that some of these things are being carried forward. Keep learning, stay open. And Ilona, I think we can go into the next slide. Work to listen and notice things, focusing on the person who was impacted. We like to conclude our sessions with some gratitude. Both Stafford and I have been fortunate enough to attend several different kinds of training and work on our own professional development. So again, when we share these slides, these are all active links, but these are organizations that have shaped our thinking and our practices over the years. They include the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters, Art Equity, Antics Community Arts, the Calgary Centre for Sexuality, Calgary Communities Against Sexual Abuse, Karen B.K. Chan, Nicole Brewer's Anti-Racist Theatre, and the Shift Project to End Domestic Violence. And then we always want to remind folks of the equity resources that are available, including the Haven Helpline and the Respectful Workplace Policy available online. That is the end of our session. Like I said, these will be shared out. The slides will be shared out to you after. But we are able to stick around, Stafford and I, for a little while longer. So if anyone wants to talk aloud or give voice to with questions or give voice to the experiences that you had in the breakout rooms, we're here for that. But otherwise, it really is just a huge thank you to all of you for attending, for sticking with us, and for participating throughout this session. It means a lot to us.
Yeah, so grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stafford and Jenna, for this workshop. I think it's been really informative and hopefully helpful to all the attendees. I want to express my gratitude to you for all the work that you've put in to gather the knowledge that can help our communities. I want to also thank our ASL interpreters, Francine and Denika, for providing increased access to this workshop, and to our staff behind the scenes, Randy and Ilona. Thank you so much for your support as well. As a reminder, if you missed any of our previous workshops, you can find them on the YouTube channel. We actually have a YouTube channel, and all the workshops we've been doing over the past several months are there. You can find them by going to YouTube and searching for Equity Communications. And also, don't forget to fill out the survey. We will send you a link to the survey to get your feedback on this workshop. On behalf of everybody at Equity, thanks for attending, and we'll see you at future sessions. However, if you want to stay and chat with Stafford and Jenna, as they have graciously offered, we can do that for a few minutes, I think. So thanks, everybody, and take care.
Thank you all.